Welcome to Busted Speakers. I'm Cam,
I'm Alex.
And I'm Ed.
and we are woefully underprepared.
That's true.
Yep, to say the least.
But how could we not be?
Yeah, so as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail and the artwork of this video, we are reviewing the new Fiona Apple album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Her first album in 8 years because, good lord, she likes to take her time, doesn't she?
There's a good meme that she just blesses us with the best music of the decade once a decade, and we've been lucky enough to get it immediately, straight away, straight off the bat this decade, but we're going to have to wait at least 10 years for the next one.
Yeah, that's fair. How do we even begin, guys?
Like we just mentioned, she very rarely releases music, and that's kind of been the case throughout most of her career, aside from having a couple of albums in the 90s when she started off.
Yeah.
Her last record, which the title is so long that you guys can't force me to say the full title, so we'll just call it The Idler Wheel. That was a great album. I loved that album. I don't know if you guys heard that one.
I have, yeah.
I haven't.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, Alex is going to be especially lost, I think, no offense, on the review of this album, because I feel like this album follows on some of the ideas that were laid out on Idler Wheel, but like really fully explores them and like builds them into a really expansive soundscape, whereas before on Idler Wheel it was felt more like testing the waters by comparison. And in that I'm referring to the percussion on this album, which is probably its most unique aspect. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like one of the more distinct musical aspects of this album for sure.
Yeah, there was a song on Idler Wheel called Hotknife, which is one of her more well-known songs. I think it was a single. The percussion throughout this album kind of makes Hotknife feel like a microcosm of the dense and off-kilter experience that we've been graced with here. And it's also a surefire indicator of Fiona's progression as an artist since her last album, but also a sign of just how much more difficult it is to get to grips with this newest installment into her discography. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've listened to this 7 or 8 times now. I literally listened to it just now for this review, and I'm still a little stumped on what to say on it. I don't even think it's like especially dense, not in the sense that it's jam-packed full of ideas. It's more just a little esoteric and left field and a little difficult to put your finger on, even with the help of genius lyric annotations.
These songs to me feel like overloaded to the max, actually, with like memorable hooks and refrains. Like I've not listened to it that many times. I've listened to it maybe 5 or 6, which is still quite a lot, and for most albums would be serviceable to be able to confidently talk about it. Not so with this one as much, but after listening to this I've got like a composite collage mix of different hooks and vocal refrains from the different songs all stuck in my head at once. So to me it feels like sensory overload. Like there's so much to take in here, and it feels so deliberate and considered that it's, like you say, hard to make heads or tails of, but we're going to try to in this review, at the very least.
Yeah, I think I might fall kind of square in the middle of you guys. Like, I do think it is pretty dense, but not super cluttered. You don't want to use too many cliches or anything, but it feels like controlled chaos in a way. Like, just all these sounds that you wouldn't necessarily expect, that you have, like, no idea how somebody could even like think to write these songs, think to include different effects, and just build these songs from the ground up. But by golly, she did it, and it's just staggering to experience.
Yeah, to elaborate on what I was saying, I would say conceptually this album isn't especially dense. It kind of challenges the listener to figure out what these songs are about and what the general like theming of the project is, more so than saying that it's musically dense in my mind, because musically this it's not the most weird thing we've ever heard or even reviewed on this channel.
No, and to clarify what I'm saying, it does feel like, I know maybe not exactly 8 years, but it feels like a lot of time was spent on this album. It feels very considered and deliberate.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's probably not meant to be considered in a few days for a review. It's probably meant to sit with you for a while and let its underlying powers take hold of you. I don't know, but
that's a good disclaimer for it.
we're still experiencing it. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely going to be listening to this a lot more after this to soak it in more, because there's a lot here. A lot of songs, a lot of aspects to the songs musically and lyrically. It feels like 8 years worth of work, but it also feels very vital and urgent at the same time.
And also, speaking on what Cam was saying about this harboring a kind of controlled chaos, I completely agree. I think there's a kind of homespun, rickety, sort of DIY rough aesthetic to the music here, especially with the particular sounds you're hearing in the percussion, and just the way certain instrumentation is mixed. It feels very lo-fi in a sense, but I wouldn't call it lo-fi because it's also all mixed well enough for all of her and her fellow musicians' ideas to shine through, like these pots and pans and whatnot, or whatever is being used. That's certainly what it sounds like to me in places. It doesn't sound rough or like harsh in any way to me a lot of the time. It's all mixed very gracefully. And even though this was a challenging listen, I would say it was a pretty pleasant listen throughout. Like, you're given enough musical ideas that are very easy to latch onto in pretty much every song here to guide you through it on the first listen. But it's only grown on me since then as I've peeled more layers away.
Yeah, I think the biggest sticking point for this album is going to be the song structures a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you've got some songs that are nothing but repetition of a few key phrases and ideas. Like Relay is probably the poster child for that kind of song on this album. Nothing about the music itself and like the DIY percussion and anything is really anything new. Like, you could take it back to, whatever, like Brian Wilson in the Pet Sounds and Smile sessions, Pink Floyd on some of their experimental stuff.
Tom Waits' Bone Machine is a record that people are bringing up a lot in reference to this one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's absolutely Tom Waits, and like I could even hear some Tom Waitsy tracks on Idler Wheel, and even I think going back to Extraordinary Machine. And so like this is just absolutely bringing all that influence to the forefront. You probably don't expect this from Fiona. Like, there's only a couple of traditional sounding songs, like, within her version of traditional. It takes all the way until Ladies at track 8 to have a song that like really fits, what you might call a normal Fiona Apple song style. And then like most of everything else is like all these swirling repetition, all these ideas just crammed together and just assembled in a way that like it feels like it shouldn't work, but by golly it does.
Could I ask you guys a question before we get into the songs more in depth?
Go ahead.
So this is some of the most unrestrained, raw but powerful singing I've heard from her, especially in like the second verse of I Want You to Love Me and like towards the end of Newspaper and Cosmonauts.
Oh man.
Like there's a lot of raw, strained vocals here from her. Has she done that the past few projects a lot? Because obviously I know her 90s stuff quite a lot. This is new to me, but is this new to you guys as well, or has she sung like this before?
I would say to an extent. I would say this links into what I was saying before about a lot of the ideas from Idler Wheel kind of being built up into a fully cohesive thing this time around, whereas last time around it was just kind of her experimenting with those ideas. Particularly on Hotknife, that was a track where there's several different layers of lead vocals interacting with each other, and like there's a bunch of tracks on here that do the same thing. But in terms of like the ferocity of her vocals, yeah, there was definitely some of that on Idler Wheel, and I haven't heard Extraordinary Machine, so I wouldn't know if it goes as far back as that. But yeah, on Idler Wheel, there were definitely a lot of weird, quirky, and also really aggressive vocal moments, which this album, by comparison, just runs you over the head with it, basically. Like, there's a lot more here.
It's really powerful, strong vocals on pretty much all of these songs.
Yeah. She's so expressive. Like, I love the vocals on this album.
And that's been true of her to a lesser degree, or lesser at that point degree, for most of her career, but this is like a whole new level of powerful to me for her. There's a reason why this is getting a lot of attention, maybe compared to some other stuff. I don't know exactly why, but this seems like the big album of the moment.
I feel like it's because it's been such a long time since we've heard from Fiona Apple. And
Yeah.
also, not to go too deep into this, but the current state of the world doesn't exactly help when a lot of artists are being forced to, rightly so, delay their records or cancel their tours on account of us being in the middle of a pandemic. And I think people were just really happy to get like an event album like this and have it be so good, largely not be considered a disappointment.
Yeah, and from a relatable circumstance of recording to what they are in right now. Like,
Absolutely. I was gonna say, I know we haven't gone too much into individual tracks yet, but the title track here, surely it must
yeah,
be coincidental how accurate it feels to the state that a lot of us are in right now, because it generally speaks to an idea of being trapped in a mental situation.
and she is specifically talking about being trapped with her past experiences in the music industry.
Yes.
But you could take the, title track chorus of "Fetch the Boat Cars, I Want to Get Out" to what we're at now. Like, it can be repurposed to mean something to you.
It doesn't peter out, but I do really like how towards the end you have these samples of presumably Fiona's own dog barking a bunch. Is it in that track, or is it in Shamika where she says her dog, her man, and her music are her holy trinity? I can't remember which song it was from.
Looks like that'd be in Shamika.
Yeah, which is a fantastic song as well. But the title track, it's got kind of a nice chilled out, laid back vibe to it. The homespun feeling I was mentioning before definitely comes through on the percussion side of this track, like more so than a lot of other songs here.
What were some other highlights for you guys?
I mean, the opener, I Want You to Love Me, is fantastic, and definitely one of the songs that on first listen I loved it just as much as I love it now. It's not the most out there song on here. Structurally, it's not too strange. I think definitely the oddest thing about this album is the song structures. There's not really a traditional pop structure on here across the whole album, whereas you could definitely apply those structures to her last album or even material before that a lot more. But yeah, the opening track has these lovely piano arpeggios on it that remind me of her best work and, stand out in their own right, and amazing expressive vocals on that track as well. I just love it.
Yeah, and I like the Yoko Ono-esque vocal parts at the very end of it. I didn't expect that.
In terms of other highlights, Cam already mentioned it, but Relay is really good. It's basically a straight up mantra. I was surprised to learn that she apparently wrote the line "Evil is a relay sport" when she was 15. And that's the lyric that's repeated ad nauseum for a lot of that song. But it's such a good line that you kind of, it's not really an issue how much it's repeated, and also the instrumental is so dynamic and driven. Not in terms of sound, but it kind of feels like a Swans song to me, where they're really ramming the same general idea by taking different approaches and different stabs at it repeatedly over the course of just one song, one recording. And it sounds great. A very odd song, but definitely speaks to the themes of the album in a cool way. I really like the metaphor of evil kind of being this never-ending race where people who choose to engage in it in a certain way are just going to carry on the cycle, basically.
Yeah, and she wrote that when she was 15.
Apparently so, and
Wow.
it's more relevant than ever now, so pretty crazy.
It's probably another obvious favourite, but I feel like most songs on here could be obvious favourites. Under the Table. It's a very sobering song. Like, it's a very specific thing to single out. Like, you can kick me under the table all you want, I won't shut up. It's like a very specific thing of like spousal abuse almost. Like, she talks in this song like she doesn't want to go to a dinner party, but she's not going to be kept down by her husband or partner or whatever in this moment. So to me, it feels like a song of like resilience and strength overcoming adversity, almost. I don't know if it's that deep, but that's kind of what I got out of it.
It is that, but it's also an acknowledgement that engaging in conflict with other people is always going to cause a ruckus, basically, and
Yeah.
that Fiona would rather shut down someone else for being inappropriate or pretentious or abusive than herself be quiet. You know, using the, I don't know if it's even necessarily a metaphor, but like in reference to like a dinner table here, it made me imagine being out in a restaurant with the public, and you know, if someone were to say something, you know, that was worth taking them up about, then doing it in public maybe wouldn't be the best idea. But Fiona's attitude towards it is a bit more admirable than that, because she, as she says, she won't shut up about it, no matter how much people try and nudge her to.
It's very. I don't know if I've been taking the songwriting here too literally, because everything here feels incredibly personal, but also understandable to the listener on pretty much every song here. And I don't know if I'm looking too much into it, but I feel like the songwriting is like one of the biggest strengths of this album. Obviously, the lyrics. So I don't know if I'm been analysing them effectively or not.
I would say that there's a lot you can derive from the lyrics here, just from individual lines and how expressively they're delivered. I think that has a lot to do with how people take in lyrics, even though if it's not necessarily what the artist is trying to get across specifically. There's just so much expression to the words on this album. I think have kind of challenged everyone who listens to it to try and read into them a lot more, because I don't feel like it's as direct as her previous work. That's kind of what I was trying to say before. Like, I don't think it's super duper dense and difficult to figure out. I think it's just a bit more personal in such a way that you'd need Fiona to guide you through what these songs are about. Otherwise, you're kind of just left to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, most songs on here have really similar themes. Pretty much every album that we've been reviewing by a major female artist since we started back up has had a lot to do with, you know, just modern times in the world we live in, and, you know, for good reason. Yeah. And this song definitely isn't an exception to that, but, like, I don't know what to say, like, tongue-in-cheek or more, like, smaller scale. Like, it's not necessarily about anything quite as heavy, but it's still just, like, you know, like a microcosm of the greater issues. Because to me, this one felt like it wasn't about, I didn't think of abuse. I was just thinking, like, you know, when somebody says something, you know, insensitive or something at the dinner table and you want to let them know or whatever, you kick them in the shins. You know, so it's like, it just feels like it's fed up with going out to eat with pretentious people, and she's telling them what she really thinks, because, I mean, this is, like, we know about her acceptance speech at the VMAs back in '97, right? She's blunt. She doesn't care about...
She doesn't suffer fools gladly, put it that way.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And so that's what I think this song is about. It's not as heavy as a lot of the other songs on here.
I don't think this is a dark album, really. I think there's a kind of an aura of playfulness to it that, I don't know if you guys felt that, but just with how expressive everything is and how many little cute ideas are put into a lot of these songs, it doesn't feel like it's trying to sound as dark as the subject matter might initially make you think. So it's not difficult or challenging a listen in terms of that. It's more just musically.
It feels like a strong release, and she's just doing whatever she feels she is best for the songs at any given moment.
Mm-hmm. Like Cam was saying earlier, Ladies is kind of back to more traditional for her territories.
Mm-hmm.
It almost has a buoyant, carefree jaunt to it. Very light piano playing and bass playing. I have to give credit to the bass player on this album, Sebastian Steinberg. I actually know him from the band Soul Coffin, which is I don't think they were that big back in the day, other than maybe underground circles, but they're a very, like, eclectic jazzy band that incorporated that into alternative rock, and he brings that to a lot of these songs, a very jazzy edge. Like, the bass playing on this album is great, and his bass playing on Ladies is really good.
There's like a loungy vibe to the bass on that track, and a few other moments here as well, I'd say. I love the bass on this album.
So that song was like a song of solidarity with her fellow woman, would you guys agree?
I haven't really read into that one too much, so I'm kind of like hesitant to say much about it, but yeah, that sounds accurate.
Kind of what I got from it, but I don't know if that's accurate either.
Yeah, it does, but it also feels like it, along with a lot of the other songs on the album, are also about specific women.
Right.
Because it's like a lot of talk about other women who have dated and or been cheated on by guys she has dated and or been cheated on. So it's hard to tell how much of that is, story songwriting, how much of it is actual experience, how much of it is, a metaphor for anything else that's going on in the world these days.
The track before that, Newspaper, is really interesting as well. I felt like musically that was possibly the most experimental and strange song here.
Yeah, it's got like a sustained nervous energy to it that builds up more and more as it goes on.
That's a really good way of putting it. It's almost like a drone almost, but then there's a lot going on musically that
Yeah.
makes me hesitant to make that comparison, but it feels like a drone in the sense of it's this singular mood that's being erupting throughout the song. That was a really difficult song to read into, but after a few listens, I grew to really appreciate that section of the album. Right at the other end of the spectrum, though, there's the song Cosmonauts, which is pretty much the best song here to me. I think that song is amazing.
Yeah.
There's so many little flourishes that give a lot of life to that song, from these hard panned acoustic guitar strums at one point to, like you were saying about the bass. The bass at the beginning of that track is interesting because it's almost this jazzy coffee and cigarettes infused upright bass intro that wouldn't be out of place in a David Lynch movie. But then it goes into a really blissful little art pop tune that is probably the poppiest thing here. It's the most upfront, and like, even though you were saying Ladies is most similar to her previous material, like more of a prototypical Fiona Apple song, I think Cosmonauts is definitely the song that you should show people who haven't heard her music before and maybe want to hear something from the new album. But at the same time, it's also a great track. I don't know if you guys have anything to say about that one.
When I was talking about other albums that kind of influenced the, DIY percussion aesthetic, I was also thinking about Vespertine. And this song, does feel kind of like kin to Vespertine, which you can't say about the rest of the album. Even to an extent, this song, nothing feels like it's going for pop success or being a good pop album.
Oh yeah, not at all.
Yeah, so like that's why I'm having trouble contributing to the individual tracks conversation, because to me this album feels like one of the most, song sweetie things we've ever reviewed so far. It's a strong track, definitely one that should be used to try to get people into it. And it also does kind of have a bit of the Bjorkiness that made me think of Vespertine.
Yeah, it has an awesome outro as well, like almost a breakdown at the end, in the traditional sense, a breakdown that works super duper well, especially because this track is so deep into the album. It was definitely a surprise when I was first listening to this, because for the most part this really sticks to its guns on the experimentation. It's not trying to be super melodic a lot of the time, whereas I'd say Idler Wheel, by comparison, it's not necessarily a poppy album, but it is a lot more easy to digest because it's a lot more melodic and driven by, more traditional chords and arpeggios and whatnot. But yeah, Cosmonauts is definitely a track that I feel like, while it still fits into that description of having this rickety percussion and this homespun feeling, it's just a very lovely song, honestly.
And the chorus line, "You and I will be like a couple of cosmos," it's just such a romantic phrase as well. It's like, just feels like a very nice, gleeful song to me. I can see why you like it a lot, Ed.
Yeah. Also, this links into another song on the album called Heavy Balloon. I don't know if there's an ongoing metaphor across the album to do with like the weight of the burdens of trauma. I've seen a few people say that. I don't know if it's necessarily the case or if it's what Fiona was going for. But yeah, the chorus of that song, if you think about it in relation to that, it's a really interesting chorus, because it kind of feels like, we'll be two people freeing ourselves of our past bad experiences. It just feels like there's a lot of thought and meaning infused in even like the most just pleasant lyrics on this album, I'd say.
All right, so Ed, what rating do you give it?
So I am super duper torn on this one. I don't think I like this album as much as Idler Wheel, and I think that has more to do with just what I generally look for in music. But having said that, I do think this album is a great success. I don't think there's a single bad song here. There's not a single mediocre moment across this whole album. Definitely a handful of tracks that I've had a lot of difficulty trying to dig into. It's kept me coming back repeatedly. I don't feel compelled to skip any songs. So 7 listens in, I'd say that's high praise, even if I'm still struggling with it a little bit. I've been really struggling to explain how I feel about the album as a whole. I can more just speak on individual songs. So for now, I wouldn't take my score for this too seriously, but I'm really torn between a 7 and an 8, like a really strong 7. And yeah, it's just a really great album. I look forward to trying to figure it out more, I guess.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm still on a journey with this album, man. I'm still gonna be experiencing this in the future, trying to make more heads and tails of it, still digesting and absorbing it. I'm a bigger fan of Fiona now. I'm definitely going to backtrack to some past works I haven't heard before.
Idler Wheel is a must listen, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Going from Win the Pawn to this one, quite a jump, but also not as much as you'd think, because there's still unifying themes and musical aspects here that make it easy enough listen in a way, but still really challenging. And I would definitely also recommend this. There's a lot of great songs on here. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10.
Alright, and I'm also in the 8 out of 10 camp. Fiona has always struck me as one of those artists who knows exactly what she wants to do, what she wants to sound like in her career, and every album is just like refining and or expanding on the work that came before it. And like obviously there's there's degrees to that, and there's definitely differences from Title all the way up to Idler Wheel. Don't think it's controversial to say that this album represents the biggest leap forward artistically that she's had so far, and I think that it just paid off stunningly. It's just incredibly personal album, and you can tell that she made it exactly the way she wanted it to be. There's no compromises to be found on this thing, and it's all the stronger for it. So maybe over time it'll rise to the rank of a personal favorite, but for now it's just a great album.
Yeah, I'm gonna backtrack and say 8 out of 10, just for the sake of consistency. I mean, it's almost certainly gonna go up to an 8 for me.
We're all in the 8 out of 10 again. Nice.
Yay. Alright, so that does it for Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple. Thanks for tuning in to Busted Speakers, everybody. If you like this review, leave us a like. You can subscribe if you want to see more album reviews. You can follow us on Twitter at _BustedSpeakers. You can follow me on Twitter at SubProspector. Check us out on Facebook, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Catch you later.
See ya.
Womp.